me suddenly in a wave or something. It's awfully nice. Okay, it's awfully nice of you to come this morning. Lovely to see so many of you. It used to be back in the day when I published my first book or two, I'd go out to talk to people, and I'd come back and tell my husband, oh, we had a great crowd, we had 8 people. So even then, he used to say, well, doesn't it make you nervous having to go out and talk to all these totally strange people about your books? I think he meant total strangers, not totally strange people. Sometimes I wonder. But I'd say, well, no, I've been a university professor, for X many years. If I can keep people awake at 8 o'clock in the morning, I can certainly keep them awake at 8 o'clock in the evening. They came on purpose to hear me. And we're closer to the former than the latter this morning, so we'll give it a good try here. If I see anybody dozing off, I'll read something exciting. Back in the day when I taught human anatomy and physiology at 8 a.m., I'd always walk into a huge auditorium full of people, including the football team, who all took my class because they thought it would be easy. Human anatomy, all you do is count your fingers, right? And they'd all be sound asleep in the front seats, these large inanimate blobs of flesh. I'd walk up to the front and say, well, this morning, gentlemen, we're going to discuss the history of contraception. And I'd start blinking. I'd say, in days of old, when nights were bold, and condoms not invented, they wrapped old socks around their cocks and babies were prevented. I guess it worked on the football team, too. Well, people always say to me, well, how did you get from being a university professor to being a novelist? I said, well, easy, I wrote a book. All you have to do is they don't make you get a license. But what they really mean is, well, science is this, tidy, linear, clinical, cold, sort of logical thing. And art, writing and all that, this is creative and warm and fuzzy and colorful. So I don't see how you reconcile this. I said, well, it's because you probably don't know anything about science. Possibly not that much about art. Most people think they understand art all right, but very few people other than scientists really understand that it is as much of an art as writing or sculpture or whatever. Nor do they understand that art is as much of a science. It has logic and rules and discipline and so forth. And in fact, science and art are just two sides of the same coin. What they both rely on is the ability to draw patterns out of chaos. When you're a scientist, you kind of define your area of chaos. You say, I see this animal doing something, or I see this phenomenon going on, and from what I know and surmise, I hypothesize that this might be what's going on. Well, then you've made a wild guess, basically. So you, based on experience, but still a wild guess, and then you design an experiment to test it and see whether maybe that is what's going on, or maybe you can say, no, that's totally not what's going on. And you proceed from there. There's no rules to science, but at the same time, it's depending on inspiration and knowledge and experience, which is exactly what you use when you write a book, or paint a picture, or compose music, or anything of that sort. And, if you write a book, you get to draw on your own personal chaos rather than just, thank you. Who's better? Are we ready? Oh, yes, that was good. Very good. Okay, where was I? Oh, yeah, so anyway, when you write a book, you get to use your own internal chaos as well as the external chaos of whatever settings you've chosen and your characters, however they evolve. People always say to me, well, you have such wonderful characters. How do you make them? How do you bring them to life? And I think they suppose that you just, pick a name and then you draw kind of an outline on a piece of paper and then you start doing voodoo to amaze this person, animate them. And that's kind of not how it works, or at least it's not how it works for me. Maybe other people do it that way. But for me, character is one of 3 kinds. Characters are either mushrooms, onions, or hard nuts. It sounds more like turkey dressing than anything else, but that's how it works for me. A mushroom is a person who just kind of springs to life out of nowhere and kind of walks off with any scene they're in. Sometimes I'm not expecting them at all. Sometimes I've introduced them as a minor character, and suddenly they're not a minor character anymore. They just talk and walk off with everything. It's always nice when that happens because it saves me a lot of work. But, for instance, Lord John is a mushroom. He, popped up unexpectedly unexpectedly in Dragonfly and Amber. I wasn't expecting a 16-year-old boy to try to assassinate Jamie Fraser, but there he was. And, that scene went great. And I thought, well, I'll never see him again. Next thing I know, he's back in the next book, 10 years older and in a much different place in his life. And he's just continued to be a mushroom, which is one of the reasons why I write novellas and shorter pieces about him. Because, he keeps talking. And there's other people like Mr. Willoughby, the little Chinese foot fetishist in Voyager. I had introduced him partly because I ran across a character named Hu, H-U, in my history researches. And Mr. Hu was a Chinese refugee who had escaped from China from doing something and arrived in Edinburgh, unable to speak the language, knowing nobody, and completely out of space and time. He was so dislocated in his culture that he just wasn't able to deal with it at all. And while people there were kind to him, they got him food and tried to get him a job and so forth, he just couldn't cope and essentially went insane, just because it was so strange to be there and to be the only one and to be so isolated. And so having read that, I said, what would it be like? What if you were able to make some connections, but you still felt this, soul-deep isolation? You were convinced you were surrounded by ghosts and there was no way out and so forth. And so that's where Mr. Willoughby came from. So I was just assuming that I'd touch on that lightly. It's one of the themes of isolation in the book, and then leave him. The next thing I know, he's become a foot fetishist. That was the result of the research as well. I buy books incessantly all the time. I always have. And I love the remainder tables at bookstores. I go through them and pick up some of my best things there. Well, one thing I picked up from such a remainder table was this sprightly little volume called The Sex Life of the Foot and Shoe, which was all about foot fetishes. Really entertaining reading. But it was partially illustrated too. But the thing is, I had heard for years about Chinese foot binding, and how that's about, hideous practice where you bend the little girl's toes under, essentially, and, squish her foot like that. And, essentially the toes atrophy and fall off after a while. And the woman is left with a foot that looks like that. And I always wondered, why the heck would anybody do that? Anyway.
I've heard it listed before, but never demonstrated before.
Really get much more interesting. But he also, as I say, popped to life and began taking over, and he walked off with every scene he was in. So he isn't a big character in Voyager, but he is an important one for that reason. Now, the Onion kind of character is a person whose innate essence I apprehend immediately. I know who they are in their core. But the more I work with them, the more layers are added and the more pungent and rounded they get. Now, Jamie and Claire are both Onions, for instance. I've known who they were from the very beginning, but as I work with them, they develop more depths, and as I understand more of their history, I have more layers to add to them. Now, the third classification is a hard nut, and these are the characters that I'm stuck with. I didn't invent them. I don't actually want them to start with, but they're there. Excuse me. Some of these are the real historical people who were there at the time. You can't really talk about the American Revolution without George Washington. And if you're actually going to meet George Washington, you have to animate him to a certain extent. Now, these are the closest to what people think writing characters is. You do, in fact, have this kind of outline of a person. You have a certain amount of research, of historical material about them. For George Washington, you have lots. And you can use that to a certain degree. But beyond that, you're using pure novelistic skill to make these people come alive and invent dialogue for them and so on. The other kind of hard nut is the person who is a situational hard nut. That is, you have this person because they're required by some mechanism of the plot or the situation to be there. But, you didn't invite them, so to speak. You didn't ask for them. They're just there. You have to deal with them. So Brianna Fraser is a hard nut. Because to start with, I had her because Claire was pregnant at the end of Dragonfly and Amber. So obviously there was a kid in this book. And the reason for the 20-year gap at the beginning of Dragonfly and Amber is because I think it's boring to write about little kids all the time. Well, it would have caused a lot of trouble also if, say Claire had discovered when Brianna was 7 years old that Jamie was still alive. What would she have done? Was she going to risk taking a 7-year-old back to the 18th century? Was she going to abandon her daughter? No, she'd, be driven crazy like Mr. Who and so forth. And frankly, didn't do that. I wasn't going to tell her. Of course, he had other reasons besides that. But anyway, that's where the various characters come from. I'm not sure what I should tell you as next. Oh, I should tell you, I guess, how I actually came to write the books in the first place. And you might be thinking whether you have any questions you'd like to ask. You probably all know that there is a cable TV series being made of the books. I said I'll be happy to tell you whatever I can tell you about that. There's lots I don't know yet. But they will start filming in Scotland in the end of September, they tell me. And with any luck at all, it will air around April of next year, so in the springtime sometime. Yeah, you probably also want to know when the next book is coming out. But it's coming out in March, and it's coming out in March because of the TV series coming out in April. As in the publishers thought that would probably be good.
It was supposed to be out in December.
And it gave me a couple of months extra breathing room, so I said, yeah, fine. Okay. Yeah, the book is coming along very well, but it's not finished yet. And it really needs to be done by the end of the year, so my poor German translator has a stab at getting it finished because the Germans, who are very Germanic, want to publish it. Well, they don't just want to publish it, they intend to publish it at the end of February. I'm not sure what would happen if I didn't actually give it to them. I'm sure there would be consequences of some kind. They might just come and get it. So I'm working away, or I would be if I weren't here, but that's one reason why I'm not going very many places this fall, so I can stay home and finish the book. It is going well, though, and I will read you some little excerpts from it later. Also, we have, or we shortly will have, little booklets written in my own marked blood, and these are excerpt booklets, or chapbooks, they call them, which have the entire text of the first 7 chapters of the book. There's something like 130 I hope you'll enjoy them. The Canadian publisher, Random House Canada, is bringing 1,000 copies today. So it said, oh, you have one? Yeah. Oh, you already have some. Yeah, already. Well, that's what you got there. So the first 7 chapters. I will review some bits that don't come from those 7 chapters as well, that you can read those for yourself. Okay, well, returning to the nonsense to how I got from being a scientist to being a novelist. I had known from the age of 8 or so that I was meant to be a novelist. I just realized one day that's what I was supposed to do. I learned to read at the age of 3 or so, but I was that age when I realized that people actually wrote books. They didn't just pop out of the grocery store shelves, like toilet paper. And I realized, well, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to tell stories and write books. I didn't know how, though. I mean, nobody does. It's not a career path like being a lawyer or a CPA or something where you take courses and you take exams and you get a credential and you can do it. Anybody who writes makes it up by themselves. You just don't know what's going to work for you. Some people write with outlines and wall posters and index cards about which of their characters like smooth peanut butter and which ones like chunky and which ones like Nutella. And other people don't. I'm one of the don't people. I don't write with an outline, and I don't write in a straight line. I write where I can see things happening. So what I need on any given day is what I call a kernel, which is just a little vivid image, a line of dialogue, just a few words of an emotional ambiance, anything that will kind of crystallize a tiny bit of reality for me. And then I sit down and I write a line or two describing that. And I stare at it, and I take words out, and put words back. And I'm juggling that sentence, trying for maximum elegance and clarity and all that. And at the same time, the back of my mind is kicking through the compost and, turning up mushrooms. And I'm saying, what time of day is it? How is the light falling? Can someone just say something? Is the room cold? And according to the answers that are coming in through my subconscious, I can continue writing one way or another. Okay, well, I didn't know this, of course, when I started writing. I was under the impression, as many people are, that you have a full-form story in your head and you sit down and type it out. It's actually not true. I don't think it's true for anybody, but some people do at least go from beginning to end. But I learned in about 3 days that this was not going to work for me, and I said, well, what the heck, I don't write, papers and things like that in a straight line. Why should I write fiction in a straight line? It's even more flexible. So I don't. I write in little bits bits and pieces, and gradually these bits and pieces stick together, make larger chunks. And as I get larger chunks, I'm doing the research along with the writing, because when you do historical research, there's basically no end to it. There's always something else you can find out. And I know way too many people who are writing historical fiction, and what they're actually doing is reading. They spent 10 years on the research, but they haven't finished their research, so of course they can't start writing the book yet. Well, I knew this, and I said, well, I'm not going to do that. I said, I'm just going to start writing, because this is a book for practice. I had decided that the only way to learn how to write a novel was actually to write a novel. So the next question was, well, what kind of novel shall I write? Because I read everything and lots of it. And I said, well, maybe mysteries. I read more mysteries than anything else. Maybe I should write that. I said, no, mysteries have plots. I'm not sure I can do that. And, so I said, well, that's the easiest possible kind of book I could write for practice. No sense making it hard. And so I thought of it and said, well, for me, maybe a historical novel would be easier. Because, there's all this research to go on. I was a university professor. I knew my way around a library. So it seems easier to look things up than to make them up. And if I turn out to have no imagination, I can steal things from the historical record. Which actually works pretty well. So I said, fine, historical novel. Where am I going to set this? Because I don't have any background in history. Just the 6 hours of Western civilization they make you take as an undergraduate. So anything would have done, I would have to look it all up anyway. So I was casting around looking for a convenient time and place in which to set this novel. And I happened to see a really old rerun of Doctor Who on public television. Okay, I see some of you are familiar with Doctor Who. For those who aren't, it's a really old, really long-running show that's done in the UK. Originally as a kid's show, but now for adults. It's been running 60 years at least. But the premise of the show is that the doctor of the title is a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey who travels through space and time, having adventures. And along the way, he picks up companions from different periods of Earth's history. And in this particular show, which has to have been filmed 50 years ago at least, he had picked up a young Scotsman from 1745. Well, this was a young man, 1819, who appeared in his kilt. And I said, well, that's kind of fetching. I found myself still thinking about this the next day in church. And I said, well, it doesn't really matter where you sent this. You're going to put it all up anyway. Why not? I said, fine, Scotland, 18th century. So that's where I began, knowing nothing about Scotland or the 18th century, having no plot, no outline, and no characters. Nothing but the rather vague images conjured up by the notion of a man in a kilt. It's, of course, a very powerful and compelling image. Yes. In fact, a few years ago, my 6th book, Breath of Snow and Ashes, was published. It was a very lucky book for me. It opened at #1 on the bestseller lists of 4 countries at once. And it won me the Corina International Prize for Fiction, which was very cool. I got to go to Germany to accept this prize, which was also cool. And while I was there, the German publisher took advantage of my presence to have me interview absolutely everybody from the tabloid newspapers up to their equivalent of Vanity Fair. Just every half hour all day for a week, we were talking to different journalists. Well, toward the end, I was talking to this very nice man from a literary journal. And he said, well, I read all of your books. He said, your imagery is just transcendent. Your characters, they're so three-dimensional. Your narrative drive is wonderful. I'm thinking, yes, go on. Instead, he paused and he said, there's just this one thing. I wonder, can you explain to me, what is the appeal of a man in a kilt? He was a German man. But I was really tired. I might not have said it. And I just looked at him for a minute and I said, well, I suppose it's the idea that you could be up against a wall with him in a minute. This is actually true, by the way. Next time you have a coat back there, it's always better when you have one in a coat. Luckily, my husband doesn't hang around for these because he's in his kilt. He's heard all my stories. Not sure if he's heard that one. Anyway, 3 weeks later, I'm back at home, and I get this pile of press clippings from this little junket. On top is the interview with the man from the literary magazine, which I recognized his name. And I can't read German, but very slowly. The publisher had put a post-it note on it and said, "I don't know what you told this man, but I think he is in love with you." As I said, very powerful and compelling images. And that's got us, through the last 22 years to here and to a TV series and so forth. So, can't say there's nothing in it. Anyway, that's what I started with, was the disjoint image of a man in a kilt. And so I just started, writing out of nowhere. The first scene I ever wrote was one of Jamie, no name at that point. I knew his first name was Jamie because the Doctor Who character who had, inadvertently inspired me was named Jamie McCrimmon. So in compliment to the character, I took the name Jamie as the first name. I didn't give him a last name for a long time because I knew nothing about Scottish history or clans or whatever, and so I wasn't sure which clan he ought to belong to. I didn't want to, have him belong to a clan to which nothing interesting happened. He belonged to one of the large active ones. So that was just off by itself. And he was talking to his nameless sister at that point. They were arguing about something while she was chopping vegetables. That scene never made it into any of my books. It was just, a means of getting words onto the page and starting things flowing. But around, I said that I was not going to do research before starting to write, and I didn't. But I did research the same day. I went immediately to the library and began looking up Scotland, 18th century. Luckily, card catalogs had just begun to be electronicized at that point, so I was able to come up with 38 references, went to the shelves where these were. There were 400 books on Scotland, costumes, language, customs, geography, anything you might want to know. So I just took along and picked out any book that looked interesting, took it home, and started doing research. That's always been my principle. I'm not reading anything boring because I don't want that in my book. I have to read the interesting stuff. And so that's where I began. And about the third day of writing, see, the only thing I knew about novels was that they should have conflict. I picked that up in college literature classes. So I was looking through the 18th century in Scotland for conflict. You don't do that for very long without running smack into Bloody Prince Charlie and the Rising. I said, yeah, that looks like conflict. All right, we'll use that as a background. Fine. I said, now, I must have a lot of Scotsmen, of course, because of the kilt factor. But I think it would be a good idea if I had a female character for these guys to play off of sexual tension. That's conflict. That's good. I said, well, knowing what I now know on the basis of 3 days reading about the Jacobite Rising, this was Scots versus English. So if I make her an English woman, we'll have lots of conflict. Okay. So I introduced this English woman, having no idea who she was, how she got into the story, or what she was doing there. But I loosed her into a cottage full of Scotsmen to see what she'd do. Well, she walked in, and they were all crouched around the fire, muttering to each other. They turned around and stared at her. I was thinking, why does she look funny? What's going on? And one of them drew himself up, and he said, my name is Dougal Mackenzie, and who might you be? And without my stopping to think, I just typed, my name's Claire Elizabeth Beecham, and who the hell are you? I said, well, you don't sound at all like an 18th century person. So I fought with her for several pages, trying to beat her into shape and make her talk like a historical person, but she wasn't having any. She just kept making smart-ass modern remarks. And she also took over and started telling the story herself. I said, well, I'm not fighting with you all the way through this book. She said, no one's ever going to see this. It doesn't matter what bizarre thing I do. Go ahead and be modern. I'll figure out how you got there later. So while the time travel was not directly inspired by Doctor Who, it's all her fault that there's time travel in these books. And, one thing's kind of led to another, because once I made that decision, well, that opened up a whole different side of her character, for sure. And it also introduced this whole new layer of conflict, as in, how did she get there? Does she want to be there? She doesn't, what's she going to do about it? And that kind of led to the whole story. It gradually unraveled. In answer to not yet asked question, but one that I often get, no, I don't have the story planned out in detail. J.K. Rowling evidently works that way, but I don't. It would not be fun if I knew what was going to happen. So, in fact, I don't. Now, I do know the very end of the last book, because that scene popped up for me several years ago, and so I wrote it down. When scenes come to you, write them down. That's a gift. But other than that, I just poke around here and there, and things match up. And it's sort of like doing an n-dimensional jigsaw puzzle in my head. So that's kind of where we are with this book. It's about 2/3 finished, I think. So should be able to do it by the end of the year. And I should pause at this point and ask if anybody has any questions. Maybe you want to be sure to be able to answer them. And still have time for reading. So we've got plenty of time. It's only 10 after 20 past because we started early. Yeah, no, we're good. Yes.
Are you Claire?
Am I Claire?
Are you her personality?
Am I her personality? Well, let me tell you a story. There was for some time a local group of fans in Phoenix who would invite me out to tea once a year and kind of pick my brains and talk about books. And on one of these occasions, they got started on the character of Black Jack Randall. And I'm like, we said dumb. He's, oh, something makes my skin crawl. And I'm sitting there sipping my Earl Grey quietly and thinking, you have no idea you're talking to Black Jack Randall, do you? Because they don't. And, you know, where do you think these guys come from? They're all me.
Will this be 1,000 pages?
Well, I'm sure the publisher hopes not. It kind of depends on how big they make the type. It could easily be 1,000 pages if they make it, 14 points. Other than that, it'll probably hit between 800 and 900. They kind of prefer that because it's easier to pack the books. You can get more of them in a box. There's paper costs and things like that which they have to worry about. Yeah, no, the ultimate size will not be up to me, but the ultimate number of words will. And it'll probably come in somewhere around 385, 400,000 words. Two of my books, Fiery Cross and Snow and Ashes, both came in 500,000, and that is really the maximum that you can conveniently find. I promised both my publishers and my agents that I would try to keep it down. It'll be about the same size as Voyager is my best guess. Yeah.
When you kill off Claire and Jamie when they die, take another character from your book, so like Ian Murray maybe, or Fergus?
Oh, when I kill off. Jamie and Claire. I'm not George R.R. Martin. I don't kill people right left and center.
Indiscriminately, yeah.
No, I understand that. Well, I continue in that universe, so to speak, with other characters. Not as such, I wouldn't just, say, well, no, this is the 10th Outlander. There's 9 Outlander books altogether, and there will be one after, written in my own heart's blood. There will also be a prequel volume, which is about Jamie Fraser's parents. Well, this one came about sort of by accident many years ago. I was talking to my then editor, and I had just been asked to contribute a novella to one of these books. They were popular for a while, where you'd have 4 authors contribute a novella on the same theme, and they'd be bracketed together. Well, someone had asked me would I be willing to write a novella, for, I think, a romance quartet or something. I don't really write romance as such, but, I can certainly write love stories. And anyway, I said, well, it'd be an interesting technical challenge to see if I could write something less than 300,000 words. I said, but I'm not sure, whether I could go about to do that, because my contract says that Random House has the option on the next book I write. I don't know if this qualifies as a book or not, so let me call my editor and ask. So I did, and she said, well, what did you think of doing for that? And I said, I thought I'd maybe tell the story of Jamie's parents, Brian and Ellen. And she said, no, you can't do it for them. She said, you have to do it for me. I lost for that book. I said, but you don't publish novellas. And she said, I'm sure you can make it longer. That's all Jackie can respond. Yeah, this lady had.
I just wanted to ask, obviously, you said you have the last scene already planned out, that you have some, but have you ever thought of a scene and then said, that won't fit in this book, and I'm going to use it in another book?
Yeah. Yeah, no, when a scene comes, I write it down regardless of where I think it will be, because I don't usually know where it will be in the book until it begins to come together and form its shape. Each book has a very distinct internal geometric shape, and once I've seen the shape, then the assembly is much faster because I know where things go. But up to that point, they're always kind of floating around. So often I will write a scene that really doesn't fit into the assembly. Well, I can't say often. This happened maybe 6 times. But sometimes I'll have a complete scene that just does not fit in this book. It's not logical. It sticks out or whatever. In which case, I just put it aside. And usually it fits in the next book. I don't think I have any totally spare ones, floating around. Though people often ask, and I say, well, do you have any bits and pieces that we could publish in an anthology? Look, if I thought it was worth publishing, I would have published it already. If I, cut it out, it's in my scrap heap. I'm not letting you expose it to public view. No. And there was, yes.
Well, I have 2 questions. How did you get, so you told us that you wanted to try writing a book. And so you did so, but did you just send it off to publishers and see if someone would take it, or how long did it take you to actually get the book published?
Well, let's see, basically 4 days is the answer there. This is the long part of the answer, is that I was a university professor, as I said, but I had kind of slid sideways into being a, quote, expert in scientific computation. And this actually has something to do with the answer to your question. And as a result of that, I was the founder, editor, and full-time writer for a magazine called Science Software Quarterly, which I published through the university, which told scientists how to use computers in their work. This was the middle 80s, and microcomputers, as they were then called, were just barely creeping into university, so nobody knew how to use them, let alone what to do with them. Well, when the need to make extra money arose, I took up freelancing for the computer press. I sent Byte and Full World and PC Magazine all a very simple query letter, along with a copy of my Science Software Quarterly and a copy of a comic book that I had done for Walt Disney Educational Media entitled Nutrition Adventures with Orange Bird. And it was a very short letter. It said, "Dear sirs, you can see from the enclosed you won't find anyone who knows more about scientific and technical software than I do, and at the same time can write so as to appeal to a broad popular audience." Well, it's got immediate results, and within a year I was making as much freelancing as I was at the university, which just goes to show how badly they pay the biology department. Anyway, as a result of this, one day Byte magazine sent me some software to review, and along with that, a trial membership to CompuServe. This was back in the day before America Online, before the web as we know it, before there really was such a thing as online. But there were these three information services. They called them CompuServe, Genie, and Delphi. Well, CompuServe still survives. As a matter of fact, most people don't go looking for it. But I was supposed to review the support forum for this software that they have on CompuServe. So I signed up, went and looked at it, sure enough. Well, then I had 4 hours of free connect time left. This was back when they charged you $30 an hour to use the internet. So I said, well, I'm not wasting 4 hours of this. Let's see what else is in here. So I poked around, and I stumbled across a group of people called the Literary Forum. These were people who liked books and writing. There were mostly readers, but quite a few writers, the first professional writers I'd ever met. And many aspiring writers, a few published professional ones, and all were a very friendly community. So I said, well, this is, at this point I had 2 full-time jobs and 3 children under the age of 6. So I'm not sure why. But this seemed like well, I know why the children. The jobs were sort of a necessity. But I decided this was the ideal social life. So I joined up, would log on between my various writing jobs, and ask questions and all that. Well, I'd been there for maybe a year when I finally decided that now was the time that I should write a novel for practice. So I was not going to tell anyone what I was doing. And I certainly wasn't going to tell my husband, who would have tried to stop me. Not out of any objection to my writing a book, but out of fear that I would die. He would have said, wait till the kids are in school, wait till you can quit one of your jobs, something like that. And I knew if I didn't write it now, I might never write it, so I didn't tell him. Didn't tell anyone else either. And I was certainly not going to tell the people that I knew online, who were real writers and things like that. But also because I had seen a lot of people come through there talking about what they were going to write, and then they'd never write a word, and they would just go on talking about their research and the background for their characters and all this. And you could sort of hear people rolling their eyes. I said, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wait till I've actually written something, and I'll see if I want to tell anyone about it. So I didn't tell anyone. But I'd been at it, the writing, for maybe 6 months, when one night I found myself having an argument with a Gabaldon online about what it feels like to be pregnant. And he said, oh, I know what that's like. My wife's had 3 children. He said, yeah, that's right. I had 3 children. And he said, well, can you tell me what it's like then? And I said, I can, yes, but it's sort of complex. I'm not sure I could, encapsulate it in a 30-line message slot. I said, but I tell you what, I have this little piece I wrote in which a young woman explains to her brother what it's like to be pregnant in some detail. But I'll put it up in the library and you can read it. So I did. And everyone who'd been following the argument went and read this piece. They all came rushing back and they said, well, this is great. What is it? I said, I don't know. And I said, well, where's the beginning? And I said, I haven't written that yet. And And they said, well, put up some more of it. This is fascinating. We like these people. So I began, every couple of months when I had a piece that would sort of stand on its own without a lot of explanation, I would put it up in the library here. And, I never put up anything, looking for critique or whatever. Because I figure I know what I'm doing. They don't know what I'm doing. I just wanted them to read it and respond to it. And so I kept doing this. And people got more and more interested. They were saying, like, what's happening next? And I'd say, I don't know. And they'd say, well, you should try and publish this. And I said, well, I'm not really sure what sort of book it is. It's got all this time travel and the Loch Ness Monster and things like that. It doesn't really seem to fit anywhere. But, eventually I'm going to write a book that I'd like to publish. So for the sake of argument, what should I do? Well, I know quite a lot of professional writers by now who are all very kind about sharing their own personal stories and advice. Every single one of them said, get a literary agent. That an agent can do two things for you. He or she can help you match the book with an editor because, they have lunch with editors. They know what various people like, what they're in the market for. They can tell you which ones would be the best markets for your books, and they can, make the approach for you. And then if the book does sell, they can negotiate a contract for you. So literary contracts are truly Byzantine things. It is only going to the perspicacity of my first agent that I still own, or did until recently, my T-shirt rights and my action figure rights. I don't actually own those anymore because now the Sony TV company does, because those are what they call merchandising rights, which go along with the film rights. And since we finally signed a contract, these many years later, those rights were actually worth something. So that was my first agent. Anyway, I found an agent. I was introduced to him actually by another one of my acquaintances on CompuServe. I was asking people about agents, and I said, I'm asking everyone, John, do you have a literary agent? And he said, yeah. And he said, by coincidence, it's Perry Moulton, who I'd heard about from many other people there, and I realized, this might suit me very well. And John said, I know you're about ready to look for an agent. Would you like me to introduce you to Perry? I said, well, yes, John, that would be very nice. I was afraid John would leave CompuServe or be run over by a bus before I finished the book, so I said, yes, go ahead. And anyway, he wrote Perry a note saying I was worth looking at. I followed this with my own query letter, which said, to Mr. Knowlton, I've been writing and selling nonfiction by myself for several years, and I understand that now that I'm writing fiction, I require good literary representation. You've been recommended to me by John and Judy and all these other people whose opinions I respect. I said, I have this very long historical novel. I don't want to waste your time. Would you be willing to read excerpts from it? I didn't tell him I wasn't through writing it, excerpts from I had. But he very kindly called back and said, yes, of course you'd read my excerpts. So I hastily wrote a 26-page, single-spaced synopsis of what I knew about the book at that point, which is quite a lot, and sent it with my bundle of excerpts. And he took me on the basis of an unfinished first novel, which is very lucky for me. So 6 months later, I finished writing it, and I got called to tell him I was sending it to him in New York, and also to tell him that I was coming to New York the next week for a scientific conference. And he said, as I had hoped, well, come on up to the office and we can meet, because we'd done all our business over the phone. I'd never met him in person. And so the next week, I went up to his office in some trepidation of mind, because at this point, he was the only person in the world who had read the whole book, and I didn't yet know what he thought about it. So Perry turned out to be a charming older gentleman, took me back to his office, got me a Diet Coke, and was trying to put me at my ease by chatting to me about his other clients. This conversation was less reassuring than he probably thought, though, because it was at this point that I realized that besides my various CompuServe acquaintances, he also represented Tony Hillerman, Frederick Forsyth, and Robertson Davies. I was sitting there thinking, if you have the nerve to call Robertson Davies Robbie, you're a better man than I am. But what was most unnerving was that he had my manuscript sitting on the table in front of him, this big orange box in which I had mailed it. And I was sure that at some point he was going to say, well, now that I've read the whole thing, there's just really nothing I can do with it. It's too weird. But if you ever write anything else, let me know. So I was expecting him to show it across to me and say that. Instead, he said, the thing about Robbie Davies and Freddie Forsyth and those guys is that they're all great storytellers. And then he laid a hand on the box and smiled at me and said, and you're another one. Well, at this point, I was so gratified I didn't care what he did with the book. But he did retain enough presence of mind to ask. And he said, well, I'm sending it out today to 5 editors who I think might like it. And he told me all about them and which ones he thought were the best bets and so on. I said, well, that's great. How long do you think we might have to wait for an answer? Because I'd been reading Writer's Market and hearing, 18 months, 2 years to get a response. He said, I've told them all I want an answer in 30 days. And I'm thinking, you picked the right agent. So I went home to wait for 30 days. Well, 4 days later, I got a call on my answering machine and said, we still have answering machines in those days. He said, this is Perry. I just called to update you about your manuscript. You may call back. And so I thought, well, if I maybe send it to at least one that said, here, I'm not reading a 10-pound manuscript, take it back. But I called him expecting to hear this, and instead he said, well, of the 5 I sent it to, so far 3 of them have called back with offers to buy it. So he was able to negotiate amongst them, and 2 weeks later he emerged with a 3-book contract, and bang, I was a novelist. It works differently for everybody. Some people get lucky on their first try, which I did certainly did. Other people, it takes them a long time, but they do get there in the end. People often ask, do you have any advice for aspiring writers? And I said, that's the same advice I'd give any writer. There's 3 rules for being a writer. Number 1 is read. Read everything. Read lots of it. Number 2 is write, because nothing will teach you to write except the act of putting words on paper. And take all the courses you want. You won't learn how to write until you actually do write. So number 1 is read. Number 2 is write. Number 3 is the most important. Don't stop. And you had a question. Well, that's a question has a few problems. First one was, I understand that you've cast the actor to play Jamie in the TV series. I didn't. I have nothing to do with casting. Fortunately, there are people called casting directors who have to worry about things like that. And they chose a very lovely young Scottish actor named Sam Heughan. Actually, he says Heughan is for public use. He says if you can manage it, it's really got that Scottish throat-clearing spitting noise in the middle. Which is bound to spray your close friends with saliva the first time you try it. If you want to try it, it's really Heughan. So I'm not surprised he uses Heughan. Anyway, lovely man, and I got to see his audition tapes, which were wonderful. I had my doubts looking at his pictures, and I was saying he was awfully young, and it's not really what I thought of as Jamie. Are you sure about this? Anyway, then I saw the audition tapes, and 5 seconds in, there was a completely different person than he looked like in his photos. 10 seconds in, he was just gone, and it was Jamie Fraser right there. It was just amazing. The second half of that question was, would I cast myself to play Claire? Well, given that I'm 61, no. She's 27, Boyer. Yeah, no, I wouldn't. She's 5'6", I'm 5'2" on a good day, and there's a few other noticeable differences. Yeah, also, I'm not an actress. The only role I've done, I see. Anyway, there are a couple of other people here. Much questions?
First of all, my first comment was, aside from the information you just gave, you look remarkably well preserved for being 82.
Thank you.
But second of all these things going on in your brain, how do you function in the real world?
You remember what I said about having 3 children in 4 years? Yeah, any mother with multiple children learns how to function on about 8 tracks at once. It's not a problem. I mean, once your kids get into school, suddenly you have all this spare mind room, that's not being concerned with just keeping them alive. I'll use it for something else. Yes, any other questions?
Yes, about your TV series. Are you working closely with the production? How much influence will you have?
Oh, about the TV series. Am I working closely with the producers, and how much influence do I have? Well, legally none. By the terms of the contract, I am a consultant, which means that they're courteous enough to ask my opinion about various things, but they're under no legal compulsion to take it. But that said, they've been very courteous about it and very, until involving me in things. They do tell me when people are cast. They show me the audition tapes. I don't know what they do if I said I didn't like someone. Unfortunately, I thought all their choices so far were great. They only made 2 choices. They chose the actor to play Frank and Blackjack Randall just a couple of days ago. I think it's a marvelous choice. His name is Tobias, and there's another big in Canada. Probably you know that Menzies can be pronounced Menzies, but it's really Menzies. I don't know how he pronounces it. My guess is Menzies. But anyway, he's a very popular character actor. He's been in Game of Thrones. He played Brutus in Rome and things like that. You would probably recognize his face if you saw it. But I saw his audition tapes, as both Frank and Black Jack Randall. He did a very great job. So I'm very happy with them as well. Yeah, so they do involve me. They do ask questions. They showed me the pilot script, which I thought was amazingly good. They said this is the first script I read based on my books that made me either turn white or burst into flames. Maybe I read a few. Yeah, so there.
I was wondering if you're going to go with a TV series, will it go like book by book?
Will the TV series go book by book? Well, I don't know. My guess is that by and large it will follow the line of the books, but it is an adaptation for a visual medium, so they may make small changes here and there to pull the pieces together in a slightly different pattern so that it makes more sense visually. Now, the producer, Ron Moore, and his partner came out to Scottsdale, where I lived, and spent 2 days talking with me before they wrote the pilot script about the characters and the backstories and the histories and the relationships. And then Ron showed me the pilot script that he'd written. But while we were talking, he said, now, in terms of adaptation, one thing that I'm thinking is that Outlander begins rather slowly in visual terms and so forth. The story, of course, is there. You're sunk into the page and the prose is going to carry you along. But just in terms of what you see, he said, what I'm thinking is, Claire is kind of the heart of this story. And it's very important that we appreciate her almost instantly for what she is. So what I'm thinking is that I start with a very brief prologue, actually set in the final days of World War II. And we see Claire, in a medical tent, deep in blood and so forth, coping and all that. You see everybody dying already. That's what I was doing. Okay, yeah. He said, and then, the crisis is over. She staggers outside. The war is over. And then we see her and Frank going off to Scotland for their honeymoon. It's like, yeah, perfect. Okay. So, this is the way his mind works. He wants to be very faithful to the story, but at the same time, render it in this sort of more immediate mode that is suitable for television. So just looking at that one script, which is all I've seen so far, I think he will do a wonderful job. Now, there are also 4 other writers working on the scripts here. These are people that he's worked with before from Battlestar Galactica. At least 2 of them were already huge Outlander fans before they joined this team. So I think amongst the 5 of them, they'll do a really good job. Yeah, go back there.
With all the research that you did on the clan, what was it about the Frasers that made you hone in on that?
Yeah. How did Jamie end up being Jamie Fraser? The research. Well, that was directly from the research. In fact, amongst the books I was reading, there's one called Prince in the Heather by Eric Linklater, which explains what happened after Culloden. It's mostly concerned with Bonnie Prince Charlie and his escape, and people who helped him along the way and all that. But it did, toward the end, return to the time right after the battle. And there's just this one little passage. It says, following the battle, 19 Jacobite officers who were wounded took refuge in the little farmhouse there by the field. It said here they lay in pain for 2 days, their wounds untended. At the end of that time, they were taken out and shot. It said one man, a Fraser of the Master of Love's regiment, escaped the slaughter. The others are buried there by the field. And at this point, I said, well, if I expect him to live into the next book, he better be named Fraser. That's why. Yeah.
One of your gifts is being able to draw the reader so much into your story, and yet you can describe a baby in one scene as I am, and horrible torture of Jamie in another scene. And I just wonder how you just put your mind in the character to be able to do that, or how do you go from the one to the other?
Oh, well, yeah, it's sort of how do you cope with the emotional dimensions of your story? How can you write, affecting bits about a baby and so forth, and then horrible torture and so forth? Well, as I said to the earlier lady, I am all of these people. And essentially, I live through whoever I am at the time being. I need to be sunk fairly deeply into their consciousness, and then I see things from their point of view. I have their history. I know where they came from. And, all of these people are, in essence, abstractions or reflections or redactions of facets of my own personality. I would like to think that Blackjack's not on top most of the time, but he is there. but I have had 3 children. I don't know the baby is. Things like that. Oh, do I expect to meet my characters? Oh, do I feel that I become part of that world, and I wouldn't be surprised to see so-and-so walk up to me? No, I mean, it's like there's a sort of well, the way I describe it to people often is that it's like I'm here and these people are over there doing interesting things in this wide open field. Between me and them, there's a sheet of plastic. Some places it's really thin, like saran wrap. I can see everything. I can hear every word, which makes it easy to write what they're doing. Other places it's sort of thicker, like 3mm painter sheets and so forth. So things are blurry and the words are a little more muffled, but I can still see the general outlines of what's going on. Over here it's like a garbage bag. It's very thick and black. All I can see is shapes bumping up against it. And I have to get up very close and feel with my fingers and listen very hard for the occasional word to see what's going on there. So yeah, they're there. I mean, they're part of me, but they're there. I don't expect to walk into one walking down the street. And in fact, this is part of where it's not really a problem. But people expect people who are cast for TV or movies to look exactly like their mental picture of what I wrote on the page. Okay, this is going through at least 3 filters before it gets into your head, and it's not going to get out of your head into a casting director's head, so there's no way this is happening. And so I post that so-and-so has been cast, and the immediate thing is, well, that's not what I think Jamie looks like. Which I'm saying, well, you're totally entitled to your opinion, but you know what, it doesn't make any difference. No, shut up. Shut up and enjoy it. Yeah. Oh, it's Claire definitely told about the letter that Frank wrote that Roger then recounts to Jamie. Yes, I'm pretty sure that's not the sort of thing that Jamie would keep from her. So, let's see, if we're going to have time to read anything, I probably should do that now. I will be talking again this afternoon, I think at 1:30, and I'll have time for plenty more questions then if you'd like. Now, I should say what I'm going to be reading this morning is from Written in My Own Heart's Blood. So if there are people who are adamant about not reading a word of the new book before they actually get the book, you might want to leave now.
Is anybody leaving? Really? Kind of amazing. I mean, I can separate. I guess some people can't separate.
They're from parts of the book that are not in your collection.
Yeah.
Places farther in than the first 7 chapters. Well, part of this book deals with the Battle of Monmouth, which most people aren't familiar with at all, even if they're Americans or Canadians. But it was a very indecisive battle. It was big, huge, and messy, but it was a really important battle for reasons that I won't bother to go into here. But it was messy because essentially Washington's troops were pursuing the British Army, which had just pulled out of Philadelphia. So it was this gigantic British Army with a 12-mile baggage train in the middle of it. And Washington had a smaller but vigorous army and were somewhat well-trained. After a winter at Valley Forge, were chasing them. This was going to be their first test of strength after a fairly dismal previous year. So everybody's kind of keyed up, but it's taking several days for them actually to catch up with the other army, during which they're frantically making arrangements and all that. So there's quite a bit of the story that deals with these few days while they're preparing for battle. And this little bit here takes place while they're in camp. It's a day or 2 before the battle, and their final arrangements are being made. And this is Ian Murray sitting out on a rock with his dog, talking to him, when his Uncle Jamie comes along. "None so young as you used to be, Yaku," he asked, scratching Hollow's white jaw. "None of us are, said his Uncle Jamie, coming out of the gloaming, and sitting down on a stump Dolly had been using to mount the wagon. He was wearing full uniform and looked hot. Ian passed over his canteen, and Jamie took it with a nod of thanks, wiping his sleeve across his face. "Tomorrow," he said in answer to Ian's raised brow. "First light, not before. We Gilberts got command of 1,000 men, and permission permission to go after the rear guard. You, I mean us, Ian corrected himself. With him? Jamie nodded and drank deep. Ian thought he looked a bit tense, but after all, he was in command of 300 men. If all of them were going with Lafayette. I think they're sending me in hopes that my ancient wisdom will balance the Sieur de Lafayette's youthful enthusiasm, Jamie said, lowering the canteen with a sigh. Ian made a noise, indicating amusement and faith in his uncle's sagacity. It might be fun, hurrying the British rear. He felt a tingle of anticipation at thought of putting on his war paint. Where's Denzel gone? Jamie asked, glancing at the wagon. Attending to childbirth over yon, Ian said, lifting his chin in the direction Denzel and Dottie had taken. He says you're hosting a Quaker meeting tonight. Jamie lifted a thick brow, glistening with droplets of sweat. I wasn't planning to join in, but I said they might use my tent and welcome. Why, are you going yourself? Thought I might, Ian said. I was invited, after all. Were you? Jamie looked interested. Do you think they mean to convert you? I didn't think that's how Quakers work, Ian said a little ruefully. And good luck to them if they do. I think the power of prayer must have limits. That made his uncle snort with amusement, but he shook his head. Never think it laughing, he advised. If Wee Rachel sets her mind to it, she'll have your sword beaten into a plowshare before you can say Peter Piper picked a peck backwards. Twice, he added, or maybe 3 times. Ian made a sentient noise through his nose. And if I were to try it, who would there be to protect the lot of them? Rachel and her mother and Dottie, I mean. You can that, don't you? That they can only be what they are because you and I are what we are. Jamie leaned back a little, pursed-lipped, and gave him the ghost of a wry smile. I can that fine. And so does Denzel Hunter. That's why he's here. It's cost him his home and his meeting. But mine, they're worth protecting. Beyond you being in love with Rachel, I mean. He wasn't in the mood to discuss philosophy, and he knew his uncle was either. The light was in that long hour before darkfall, when the things in the forest pause and draw breath, slowing for the night. It was a good time to hunt, because the trees slowed first, so you saw the animals still moving among them. Uncle Jamie kept that. He sat relaxed, nothing moving save his eyes. Ian saw his gaze flick up and turned his own head to see. Sure enough, a squirrel clung to the trunk of a sycamore 10 feet away. He'd not have seen it had he not caught the last flick of its tail as it stilled there. He met Jamie's eyes, and they both smiled and sat silent for a while, listening to the racket of the camp, even this beginning to mute itself. Denzel and Dottie hadn't come back. Perhaps the birth was more complicated than Denny had thought. Rachel would be going to Jamie's tent soon for the meeting. He wondered about that. Jamie had told him what General Green had said about Quaker marriage rights. You needed a meeting to counsel the two of you and then to approve and witness the marriage. Might Denny have it in his mind to establish a new friends meeting within which he could marry Dottie, and Rachel might wed him? Jamie sighed and stirred, getting ready to rise. Uncle, Ian said, in a casual tone that made his uncle instantly focus attention on him. What? Said his uncle wearily. You haven't got your last with child, have you? I have not, Ian said, offended, and wondering vaguely how his uncle had known he was thinking of Rachel. Now, why would you think a thing like that, evil-minded old bumper? Because I can well enough what uncle usually means, Jamie retorted cynically. It means you've got yourself into some confusion involving a lass and one advice. And I kind of think what you could be confused about with regard to me, Rachel. A more straightforward lass I've never met. Bar your Auntie Clara, that is, he added with a brief grin. Ian said, not less pleased by his uncle's acuity, but obliged to admit the truth of it. Well then, it's only, despite the completely benign intent, well, the innocence even, of the question that had come into his mind, he felt his face go hot. Jamie raised his brows. Well, if you must know then, I've never lain with a virgin. Once he'd got it out, he relaxed a little, although his uncle's brows nearly met his hairline. And I'm sure Rachel is one, he added defensively. I'm sure too, his uncle assured him. Most men wouldn't consider that a problem. Ian gave him a look. You ken what I mean, I want her to like it. But commendable that he had complaints from women before. You're in a rare mood, Uncle, Ian said coldly. You ken very well what I mean. You mean if you're paying a woman to bid you, you're not likely to hear anything you didn't like regarding your own performance. Jamie rocked back a little, eyeing him. Did you tell Rachel you're in the habit of consorting whores? Ian felt the blood rush to his ears, was obliged to breathe evenly for a moment before replying. I told her everything, he said between clenched teeth, and I wouldn't call it a habit. He didn't know better than to go on with, it's no more than other men do, because he can't find what sort of answer he'd get to that. Fortunately, Jamie seemed to have reined in his jocularity for the moment and be considering the question. Your Mohawk wife, he said delicately. No, Ian said. The Indians see betting a bit differently. And seizing the opportunity to give it his own back, added, Do you not recall the time we went to visit the snowbird Cherokee, and Bird sent a couple of maidens to warm your bed? Ian gave him an old-fashioned sort of look, made him laugh. Tell me, Ian, he said after a pause, would you be having this conversation with your dad? God, no. I'm flattered, Jamie said dryly. Well, see, Ian had answered by reflex and found himself fumbling for an explanation. It's no that I wouldn't have talked to Dad about things, but if he told me anything that, well, it would have been to do with him and Mam, wouldn't it? And I couldn't. Well, I couldn't, that's all. Ian narrowed his eyes at his uncle. You're not going to try and tell me that my mother, who's my sister, no, I wouldn't tell you anything like that. I see your point. I'm only thinking. He trailed off, and Ian gave him a pointed look. The light was fading, but there was still plenty. Jamie shrugged. Well, it's only, your Auntie Claire was widowed when I wed her, Oh, So it was me that was virgin on our wedding night. Ian hadn't thought he'd moved, but Rollo jerked his head up and looked at him startled. Ian cleared his throat. Oh, aye, said his uncle, dry as a lemon. And I was given any amount of advice beforehand, too, by my Uncle Dougal and his men. Dougal Mackenzie had died before Ian was born, but he'd heard a good bit about the man, one way and another. His mouth twitched. Would you care to pass on any of it? God, no. Jamie stood out and brushed bits of bark from the tails of his coat. I think you ought to, Ken, you should be gentle about it, I had thought of that, Ian assured him. Nothing else? Well, Jamie stood still, considering. The only useful thing was what my wife told me on the night. Go slowly and pay attention. I think you kind of go wrong with that. He settled his coat on his shoulders. Like that, Ian. I'll see you at first light, if not somewhat before. Like that, Uncle Jamie. As Jamie reached the edge of the clearing, Ian called after him. Uncle Jamie! Jamie turned to look over his shoulder. Aye? And was she gentle with you? God, no, Jamie said.